every situation is unique for all of my clients is how I look at it. However, I
Right.
have 6 key behaviors that I beat into everybody as much as I can. Because truly, when it comes down to it, investing, the market does not care about you. No matter what we want to think or how smart we want to be, the market does not care. The market says, okay, I want to know what's going to happen in the future so that I can keep going up and to the right.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we'll be discussing finances from a family perspective, specifically focusing on children and teaching them finance. And our guest today is James Woodall. James, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Brent, for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Now, we always like to get to know the guest. So the first question I'm going to ask you is the loaded question. Who is James Woodall?
It's such a good question. Who's James Woodall? So about me, real quick, crash story is had a really interesting childhood. I was very fortunate, had great parents. And through that whole entire growing up as a kid, doing karate to baseball to football, learned a lot about team sports, about myself as well, and kind of developed this tenacious attitude that, for better or worse, has always stuck with me. And part of that was actually learning about finances from my mom, and then having an experience with my grandpa when he passed away, where the family kind of split apart because there was not enough good estate planning, which is something I learned stuck with me a lot more than I ever thought. And so I ended up, getting a job in the financial sector, had a knack for day trading, and turns out people like that. So I went over and started working at a large mutual fund company down here, learned a lot of tricks of the trade, actually saw, hundreds of thousands of accounts, saw what worked and what didn't work. And as it was happening, kind of found my passion for wealth management. And then in 2022, started my firm, Woodall Wealth Management.
Okay, no, interesting stuff. Now, it's interesting you bring up the estate planning piece because, I'm just thinking back to my experience working in security and healthcare specifically. One of my old bosses, he was sharing a story. He actually had a few stories like this, but where there's actually family members fighting over like literally fighting over the body of somebody over in
Yes.
one case, it was a TV. Obviously you don't have to delve too much into it as comfortable as you are sharing, but what were kind of some of the challenges that that you saw in your situation in your family?
Yeah. And so this was, I remember this, it's so clear. Like, I remember it was 7th grade, that long ago, now I think about it. And we were doing sex ed. So got to skip that. I got the funeral, for better or for worse. And I remember when that happened, my parents or my dad and his brothers came in and saw essentially my step grandma come in and actually shredding documents. We always thought that was kind of interesting. We never knew what it was. I never knew what it was. But what ended up happening is it created this fracture because my dad is so much younger than his 2 brothers that, he's the younger brother. Don't worry about him. They still have, an equal right to everything. One of the brothers decided that, hey, they're going to kind of manage the assets. Or the other one said, hey, I'm okay. I'm not going to worry about it. And it became this, almost a decade-long issue with where's the assets at? What are we looking for? Like, why is there banks everywhere? Is there cash? Was there cash? Oh, I don't know. And it just created this tension within the family to the point where one of our uncles we just don't chat with anymore. It's just one of those things. And I said, hey, as I start my firm, we're going to focus on that because I don't want people to have to deal with that again, because it's not just who gets the money, it's how do they get it? How do people react afterwards? People get a little weird when it comes to money. So that's kind of why, I'm getting this all started this way and kind of focusing on this because, people fighting over TV, I've seen it happen.
No, fair enough. Now, it's interesting. So we will get to the part about teaching children finances, obviously, but I want to kind of park here a little bit and talk about estate planning and, how you've really built a business around this. So yeah, let's dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I operate my firm is I was fortunate at the previous firms I worked at to work with groups called family offices. So a family office is typically let's say an individual, like a group of families or a family with like an assets of like $50 million. Well, we don't all have $50 million, but maybe we all need those services. So a lot of times, you may not need someone to understand how to depreciate a private jet, but maybe you need to understand how to maybe buy a rental property and how do you depreciate that and build that down. Well, as we get older, the two things in life are taxes and death. Those are the two guarantees in life. So with that, what happens when we pass? What happens with that property you have? And it's having those discussions with your family members and creating that family office atmosphere around it. Because you may have kids that, I've seen this actually one time where they thought the daughter was going to take on the family business because she was always there. She was there because she kind of was told to be and didn't want to discipline her parents, but she was terrified. She had no interest. So it's about having those conversations, how you push your legacy one step further and take care of that next generation in a proper and efficient manner.
Right. And then I guess, what are some of the common challenges that you see, within estate planning when you're talking to families?
One of the ones is so I had this recently happen in my family is when someone passes, it's just that shock to the system. Just, what do I do? What do I do? Where's everything at? Where do I find things? That was an issue when my grandpa passed away. That's an issue recently when my uncles passed away as well, is where are those assets at? Where do we find everything? And then what do I do next? Where do I go? That's actually probably the most common issue I've seen, no matter what kind of planning you do, no matter what happens, because it's a very natural reaction. It's just, what do I do? So there's a lot of ways to do this where you have either an advisor like myself or an estate planning attorney or someone has all the assets listed everywhere, where those assets are, what to expect of them, and then an action plan for each thing. Another thing that we've run across too is when I had a client, her husband had passed away and he had a large position of a company stock. And we said, hey, this is actually a very good risk to you because if this company goes down, your net worth drops dramatically. And she said, I can't sell this because this is the last of my husband. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly understandable. And so there's ways to kind of work that through and work that out either through insurance products or wills or trusts or houses or what you want to do with those houses. It's always just that kind of, what do I do? And then, as just what do I do? What do I do next? Those are probably the two biggest things I've run across.
Okay, no, interesting. Now, I want to circle back to something that you said earlier as well. You talked about the fact that your mom really taught you a lot of what you know about finances. Mm-hmm. So can you unpack that? What was it like growing up and learning about finances from your mom?
So my mom was a private banker with Chase. I think it was like a small bank that Chase maybe bought or something like that. And she taught me how to balance a checkbook. And I'll tell you right now, I hated it. I hated balancing checkbooks. I was like, this is dumb. I know I spent $20, I don't know, or $1.50 on toys or candy. I don't need to track it. She goes, well, if you don't track it, you're going to overspend money. Then you're going to owe the bank of mom some money. And so I remember doing that as a kid. And honestly, I hated it. It's like, this is miserable. I did not like doing, math outside of school because I was just like, this is terrible. But it taught me that, if I'm going to spend $1 here, I'm going to lose $1 there. And just that simple concept kind of just, I think, has grown to what it is today. But just that was really what she taught me. And I must have been 10-ish years old is right when that was starting. And then, of course, when I started working at a younger age, started working at 15 as a lifeguard, that's when I started really learning how to save and what taxes are and that lovely joy. And that your overtime gets taxed more. I didn't know that. But that's what kind of started teaching me how to save early on. Was just my mom really just kind of instilling it into me because it's what she did. And then as it grew on to my working career.
Awesome. So what were some of those principles that your mom taught you? Obviously the importance of saving, but like, was there, well, it sounds like you learned a little bit of it on your own as well. So was it like, did you have like a set amount that you had a goal of saving every time you got paid, or was that something that your mom taught you?
Yeah, so that's exactly what she taught me. She was, hey, you need to save half of this. And knowing now, and I think I want to kind of expand on that too, it's not just saving, but it's saving and investing. as well. Because when I was so much younger, you have so much time, which is something we can certainly go into to invest, that at the time I just thought, okay, save cash, save cash, save cash. Well, end up what every 16-year-old does, it spends it all on gas. Instead of a truck that maybe got 10 miles to the gallon. And then fast food and pizza, like literally, like if it rained, we're eating pizza. And I was like, don't worry, guys, I'll buy it. I'm the manager, whatever. Just kind of throwing away money. And if I was tracking my spending, definitely would have done things differently. And if I invested as well. I didn't really learn the investing piece until really, I think 10th or 11th grade. I think we had a group called Junior Achievement come in to our school and teach us like the stock market. I always thought that was fascinating. And they said, hey, you have 3 weeks to make a bunch of money. Figure it out. Here's how it works. Go. And if I knew that, I would not have bought like, Harley Davidson. I probably shouldn't say that, but some of these companies that I bought way back when and fake money, and then actually try to do it for real and made a real difference in my life.
No, fair enough.
Yeah, I kind of like all over the place in that one, right?
Well, the one thing that you touched on too was the whole piece of around investing and obviously being younger, having more time. Now, I guess it's a concept that, some people don't really understand, but can you unpack that? Because I know there's some stats around it and you probably know some of them offhand, or at least can break them down in a certain way. But yeah, let's talk about investing at a young age.
Yeah, so it's really the beauty of compounding interest, right? It is the eighth wonder of the world. I was playing around some math before, playing around this, because in the U.S. there's a new thing that came out a handful of years ago, and I'm curious if this is in Canada, is a kids Roth IRA. So the IRS in the U.S. basically said that, hey, if you're a kid under the age of 18 and you're making what they consider reasonable income, so for example, they literally use if you're a babysitter at 10 years old, and let's say you make $10,000 a year at 10 years old, that's awesome. But two, you can put $6,000 of that into a kid's Roth IRA. And I was playing around with some numbers. And so when we think about the grand scheme of things, $6,000 a year truly is not a lot of money. If we think about the lifetime, how much wealth we grow over our lifetime, how much income we have. If you're younger, I know it may sound like a lot, but when you add up everything that you've ever made in your life, it ultimately becomes a small portion. So I was playing around with numbers earlier. So if you're 10 years old and you're putting in, let's say, $6,000 a year in the S&P 500, which is the largest 500 companies, and you just every year, just consistently, and you say, hey, it averages 8% or so, that's $5.9 million for you tax-free in retirement. How crazy is that?
That's insane.
Because you have all that time, and then if you change the numbers around, so 50 years, I think I did the math, it's like $3.5 million. But if you do 10 years more, this is really the true power of this compounding interest. You wait 10 more years, my number's $7.5 million. How crazy is that, right? Like it's the craziest thing in the world but no one teaches this really in high school or junior high or anything like that. But you go, oh wow, like that's a large amount of money for a little bit out of work, because you started so long ago, you started so early. And that's the magic of it. I mean, I wish those existed as I was a kid. I may have done something or bought, stupid stocks and lost my money, but it's a tool that's out there in the US. I'm really curious to see what exists in Canada, because I haven't yet figured that one out.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like the Roth IRA. Well, especially not the children's Roth IRA. There's nothing I can think of like that. I know we do have some other benefits. I know there's the registered education savings plans. There's a there is one. I actually learned this from a guest that we had on, but there is a benefit as well if for a child who has a disability, where it's a really similar savings plan that will help prepare them for the future. But nothing I've seen anyways. But obviously I'm not a financial expert, but I don't think that we have anything like that, which is pretty interesting that there's something like that in the US. And you said it's just in the last few years, right?
It's just in the last few years I've really seen it, but it may be there or may be coming. I mean, there's so much that our systems share. There's like a new regulation that came out for us that literally is copied from Canada. I mean, it's the same regulation. I think they just did copy paste. That here you guys go. And then we have those like similar education accounts. We call them like 529s, and the same thing. You save for college, or you can save if you're disabled, and you kind of get that. So there's a lot of similarities to it, to the point where we have a lot of Canadian clients, my firm, but other firms I've worked at, lots of Canadian clients because of very similar things. So, it's kind of like brother and sister at that point. So it may be coming, who knows? That'd be really cool if it does, because it just shows you the power of compounding interest for that much longer. And even if you're 18, hey, start when you're 18, that's still a substantial amount of savings for retirement. And that way, you think that's so long, down the road, but it's just a little bit of money. Just keep plucking it in there every once in a while, and then just being consistent, it adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm curious as well, because you talk about investing, and one of the things that I'm seeing a lot more of and hearing people talk about a lot more is investing in real estate. And I know you have some thoughts on that, so I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are, because I don't actually know. That was the one thing I couldn't find when I was preparing for this.
Yeah, so real estate, I think, should be a part of everyone's portfolio. Candidly, my models that we hold real estate mutual funds. It's a great thing. Real estate's a great tool. Now, that becomes a conversation, because I noticed this too recently. A lot of these podcasts is folks are doing just do real estate. Well, it made sense when interest rates were zero, right? As interest rates rise, your real estate prices are going to shoot up dramatically, to the point now where I think the median home price in the U.S. has gone up 30% in the past few years, because rates are so low. I can afford more of a monthly payment, therefore more house, therefore I'm charging more for my house. But candidly, if I waited, one more year when I sold my house, I'll probably make an extra $100,000 because they dropped rates to zero for the same house. So it's a crazy thing that people are running into. So if you're looking at buying a home and just say, I'm going to do nothing but real estate, that's certainly an option. But you live and die by that real estate. You live and die by how your renters, how your tenants. Do you have good tenants? Do you have the right place? Are you trying to do commercial real estate, which I don't know too much about? That's the one I kind of stay away from, because I've ran across some of the commercial real estate guys, and they are a whole different breed of animal. But the real estate, the residential real estate, I met a handful of folks that you can have it. It's certainly a part of it, but like everything else, you want to be diversified. You don't want to own this whole one sector, make a killing, sometimes make it killed by it other times as well. So yes, should you have some? I'm always about it. We did my models, but I like liquidity over anything else.
All right, interesting. All right, now I want to talk a little bit now about teaching. I want to do a deeper dive into teaching finance to children. So, as a parent, I have 4 kids, and we want to teach them financial responsibility, something that we had to kind of learn on our own as adults. But having those conversations with children, how do you recommend we start the conversation, first of all?
So I think it really depends on the age. I've been trying to figure this out a little bit myself too. I really candidly think as long as they can do addition and subtraction, that's when the conversation should start. And then how do you do it? I remember being a kid and having an allowance and doing chores and learning how to do this. Say, hey, if you do X for this amount of time and this amount of labor, you're going to get this as a reward, as a currency, as whatever. And then
Right.
I remember as a kid going, okay, well, I have this, say $20. Well, then my parents saying, okay, you have a choice. You can spend it on this, or you can save it, or you can invest it. What do you want to do? And I think that's the key right there, is saying, how do you create that choice for the kids, create that environment for them to have those choices? In fact, there was a study that came out that said, there was the Oreo cookie test. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It was with kids, and they said that, hey kids, if we're gonna put an Oreo in front of you right now, but if you wait 30 seconds, we're gonna give you 2 Oreos. If you wait a minute, we're gonna give you 4 Oreos. And it was fascinating because you could see that, it's like, oh, there's an Oreo right there. Like me, I would just eat it instantly. But they would just basically go, and they said basically the longer they could wait, you kind of see, like, they said it almost like related some intelligence of kids, but also showed them that, hey, if you wait and you're patient, you can get a great reward. So what happens if we do that for kids in the real world with real consequences? Teach them consequences that, say, hey, we're going to give you $20 and you can spend it on food, you can get a new toy, or you can put it in, let's say, this investment. And I know you can't get a toy today, Well, you can get 2 or 3 or 4 toys tomorrow. How's that sound? And if anything, just that concept, introducing that concept, and just keep, repeating it, keep emphasizing it. You could see them say as they grow up, say, you know what, maybe I do want to wait. I don't know what I want to get today. I'm going to go do this. And then if you see them, and then if you're lucky, everything goes well initially, and does good. Well, that's going to be great, because then they're going to see that return immediately, that instant gratification of, hey, I waited a little bit. I got 2 toys because I waited a day or 2 instead of 1 toy. So I think that's kind of the trick, is just starting that conversation about choices.
Now, would you have any rules around different things? Like, I'm just thinking in terms of my kids, like they have some fairly specific rules around, what they have to do with their money when they get it. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think there should definitely be some rules with it. I remember talking to clients, and they were teaching their kids about how to invest. And they said, hey, here's the rules, is I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're going to sit down next to me, and we're going to log into the accounts. I actually remember one guy in particular did this, and I really liked it, is you're going to sit down next to me, and we're going to go over all the options in the world. And he kind of did it on purpose, because he wanted to show his kid that there's so much out there. You kind of need to have an idea of what you're doing, which I really thought was really, really smart. He goes, yeah, you're gonna sit next to me. We're going to log in, and we're going to go through all this research. And then you're going to have to make a decision, and you're going to stick with that decision for a time frame that we say is appropriate. And he goes, okay. And I never saw what he did, never did the follow-up or anything. So it was just a quick phone call. But he went through that. I thought that was brilliant. I think that's a good way to do it. And keep those parameters as like anything else, right? When you're learning, fairly tight, and then keep expanding it. So maybe initially it's, hey, we're going to let you invest however many dollars. This is the dollars that you earned. So you get to make the decision where it goes. We'll make it happen, but you got to stay with this investment for a year or 2 years, or any dividends pay out, you get to keep, and you get to do whatever you want with that money. And then see how that goes, and then watch them learn. I think that's probably a good way. How do you get to do that?
So I haven't even touched investing with my kids yet. It's all been around saving. So anything they get there, they have to be saving 10% of it. If they want to buy something, let's say they want to buy something that's $10, they have to be able to save $5 so that they're not draining out what they have. So that's kind of the loose structure around it. And I actually have to give credit to Mark Beavis and Brandon Beavis. There's some Canadian investors who have a YouTube channel, and I learned some of that from them, because that was how Mark, he's a financial, he's an advisor, and he taught both of his sons kind of how to invest the same way, like how to invest and just about financial literacy the same way. There's much more to that, but those are kind of the 2 basic principles.
I like that. That's real interesting. So there was a podcast I listened to years ago called Lambo Goal. It's like about starting a business and creating one. And they said the goal of this podcast is to help you create a business where you can have a ridiculous goal, and it costs you 10% of whatever your net worth is, or something like that. I thought that was kind of a fascinating way to do it, because you get that reward structure and everything. And maybe that's a good way to do it as well, and say, hey, because the way I operate is everything's goal-based planning. What do you want out of life? Let's go define some goals. Let's go figure out what your values are and see what they can be. And then now working with kids, hey, what's your goal? What do you want to see? Do you want to see a dollar amount? Do you want to, let's say, buy a new car? Okay, we want to buy a car. Well, we're going to say it's going to be, let's say, I don't know, $10,000 or something. Who knows the car prices today? But you're going to go get a new car. It's going to cost you this much money. We have to get to this point to get there. And then maybe I'll match you, and you kind of inspire that company 401k match with that as well. So maybe that's a good way to start it, because ultimately the day where people goals work, and that way there's always a carrot at the end of the tunnel, and they can actually see it happening. And then of course we start talking about developing. That's something we can also talk about as well, is developing good behaviors. That way they're not trying to time the stock market or pick what's hot or follow the meme stocks or Bitcoin or anything like that. They're actually following good investing principles.
Right. So let's talk about some of those, because that's kind of that's what you hear a lot of talk around. Like I don't personally really know anybody, at least, not that I'm aware of, who has made a fortune off of Bitcoin or crypto or any of these things, but I hear people talking about it all the time, saying, "Hey, I know this guy who made this much on it, and if you give him this much money, this is a return that he'll give you in 2 months." So let's talk.
Run.
Yeah, no, I heard those conversations, and that was about as far as they went. But but in terms of just, I guess, more feasible or more realistic investment strategies, what do you kind of teach in terms of that?
Yeah, so I have every situation is unique for all of my clients is how I look at it. However,
Right.
I have 6 key behaviors that I beat into everybody as much as I can. Because truly, when it comes down to it, investing, the market does not care about you. No matter what we want to think or how smart we want to be, the market does not care. The market says, okay, I want to know what's going to happen in the future so that I can keep going up and to the right. And, some days, and I heard this recently and I really liked it, is you can be Mr. Market. So think about it like this. So, and bear with me, I know I'm kind of going around a little bit, but Mr. Market is a crazy guy. He's bipolar and he's manic depressive. And, some days he's really good, some days he's really bad. But generally he's a pretty good guy, and he likes to make everyone else do good. But some days he just kind of loses his mind. So you can spend all your time in the world, trying to get in the mind of a crazy person, and you can try to see if he can go up and down today or not, or you can spend your time better off doing other things, maybe growing wealth in let's say a real estate empire or something else. That way you can use whatever you're making to put into the market and do its thing. And that's where these key behaviors come in. So when I think about the first key behavior, it's faith in the future. That's number one. Like I used to have a cup of coffee or a coffee cup that in 1994, it said the S&P 500 was worth, let's say 894 points. What do we flirt with now? Like 4,500? I haven't even looked recently, but we're so far up there. But when I got that coffee cup, I was working at a place that was in the same building for 30 years. And I was drinking out of it, and someone came by and he goes, that's fascinating. I remember seeing those numbers and go, it can never go higher. That's impossible. I was like, I'm going to keep this coffee cup for that conversation right there. Like I knew at the time, I was like, that's actually a really important concept. So the number one is faith in the future, right? We're always innovating. We're always creating new things. The average life expectancy today is in the 90s.
Right.
30, 40 years ago, that was in the 60s.
Yeah.
So because of all the technology advances. So number one is faith in the future. Number two is just being patient. Like we were talking about earlier, that compounding interest, how things can take so long. That 10-year difference, if you're, $4 million or so, things can take time. So you got to be patient. And I'll be the first to say, I'm not patient at times. It happens to the best of us. I'm still people, but it happens to the best of us. That's why we have this rubric. The third one, is being disciplined. So you want to invest in what's always worked, not what works today. So that's why I use boring old mutual funds and ETFs for my firm. You won't see me talk about Bitcoin or anything like that, or all crypto or whatever is the new hot thing today. It's just what's worked and what's always worked. And so that way, those three things are the three most important in that order. And then it really kind of comes down to the investment side of things. So the fourth one is your asset allocation. What ratio of stocks, bonds, and cash do you have? Because that's going to determine what your wealth is going to be. Because stocks typically grow at this rate, bonds grow at this rate, cash stays stable, more or less. In fact, you can even argue cash loses money due to inflation, but either way, it's your ratio of stocks, bonds, and cash. And that's determined by how much risk you can take, your time horizon. There's probably multiple ways on the internet to find out what's appropriate for you, or working with a professional. They'll give you their recommendation. And then from there, it's being diversified. So you want to, we were talking about earlier about the real estate. You want to own enough of something to do okay, but you don't want to own enough to get killed by it. So a good example is energy stocks right now, right? So this year, everything's been going down, but energy has shot up dramatically. But every other year, it's been, hurting pretty bad, right? So you want to own everything. You want to own a good diversified portfolio, because some years things do good, some years things do bad. And that kind of brings me to that 6th point, which is rebalancing. And that's something that a lot of folks don't do. They buy and hold a mutual fund, hold it forever, but you don't rebalance. And so when you rebalance, we were talking about earlier how some things are doing great and bad. You may be selling all your energy stocks this year to buy something that's in the tank today, but next year that goes up, and so you bought it at a discount. So those are the 6 key things. So if you can follow those 6 key things, you can have a very successful life just being boring investing. Just by being boring, not having to worry about the market. You just say, hey, first of the month I put in some disciplined, whatever amount I'm going to invest. We do it in our 401ks already and don't realize it. But if you do that with everything else as well, it tends to work out. It tends to work out for everybody. And that's 90% of it right there. And then maybe 10% of it's timing if you're lucky. Let's say market dropped. Let's say June was pretty bad as well. You bought a whole bunch of stuff there, and then we've been going up. Cool. You got lucky, and we get lucky every once in a while, but being disciplined, you're still buying at the low and selling at the high. So those are my big 6 things.
The one thing we actually spoke with someone recently, and we have him actually coming on the podcast, in the near future. But he talks about investing and using that as kind of protection. Investing in real estate specifically as a way of protecting yourself against inflation, because the kind of thinking is, you're buying in today's dollars, which in the future are going to be worth less. But when you make the sale on that property, or if you reinvest that the funds from that into something else, you're working in the present day dollars for the time of that sale.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and not only that, in the U.S. you can depreciate a home, a rental property, and you have each one that's an individual LLC or not, or corporation, whatever you decide, and they're individualized. You definitely depreciate them. There's some great things you can do with that. But you can also do that with the stock market as well. That's why I always say have a diversified portfolio, because you may not be able to increase the rate of your interest or your rent as much as you can with the cash flow as you can from the stock market. Because you can still do both. You don't have to have just real estate or just stock. You can still do both, because that way you get that diversification. So for example, let's say interest rates go back to what they were in the 80s and they shoot them up again because we have a Federal Reserve that's saying inflation's too high. The only tool that we have available is to raise interest rates to cool it down. So, well, that's going to cool down the growth of that home value, right? What we were talking about earlier. But the stock market will continue to grow. In fact, bonds, 14% bond, that's amazing. Like I would kill for that. That's great. So you want to have both, and that's why you want to always try to beat that inflation. And the only way to beat inflation consistently is by being invested in whatever you need to be invested in, and not holding cash. In fact, those that are saying, I don't want to lose money, so I'm not going to invest, I'm going to hold just cash. Well, inflation was at 9.1% earlier this year in the US. You lost 9% of your wealth by doing nothing. By not wanting to see red, you lost money because it's just not worth as much. So it's a balance of everything, and it's just keep investing, keep it going. And then real estate's always fun. Candidly, I tried to do an apartment, and I'm really glad that did not work out. So what I learned here in Dallas is the apartment game is crazy. It's you have to get an apartment, and then you have to keep upgrading it constantly. You're always upgrading and always trying to get the next best thing, because people are coming in, so rates keep rising, which hurts the local economy, is my opinion. But if you have a home rental and you find a good renter, well, that's great, because you don't need to get the next, golfing simulator or biggest pool with the biggest speakers and sound systems. You don't need that, because you have a good family that's consistently paying you. You're above your mortgage. So yeah, it's a good part of it, but not everything.
No, okay, cool. No, that makes perfect sense to me. So okay, so I'm curious now, because you mentioned the whole apartment thing. So as much as you're willing to share, what happened there? Why did you decide not to go through with that deal?
Oh man, it was crazy. So I was looking at buying a house, and I read there's a great book called Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss.
Right.
I swear by it, love it. And the Arnold Schwarzenegger chapter was fascinating, learning about who Arnold really was. And he is just a brilliant individual. One of the things he did was he bought an apartment building and then lived there and then rented out the units. And then as income kept coming in, he would renovate a unit, keep renovating it. And he even says to his credit, because, hey, I got really lucky. I bought it in the right area, and then things blew up 5 years later. And so I was like, that's awesome. I want to try that. So I found an older apartment building that had like maybe 6 units, and 2 were for sale next to each other. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be like Arnie, and I'm going to go slowly take over these units and get the building. And going through it, and I realized, it was so past my budget. I thought the only way this is going to succeed is if I get someone to rent an old kind of crappy unit in an area where everything else was growing up dramatically. So I chickened out. I don't know if it's for the best or for the worst, but I chickened out. I backed away from it. And then now learning kind of how the apartment game works in DFW or Dallas was basically like, okay, it's you got to keep putting a lot of money into it and then keep turning it around, hope you get good tenants and protect yourself. And it's too much.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. And then if I had like 5 of the units of one, then of course, that one guy would have known. He said, all right, you're going to have to pay me like $1 million for this one unit or I'm not leaving.
No, of course. And it's interesting because, a lot of people are choosing Dallas as a place to relocate to. So.
Oh yeah, it's crazy here now. This place has exploded. I moved up here about 10 years ago. And like you have Dallas and then kind of Fort Worth are always separate. They've really grown into one just giant mega city. Like I watched Judge Dredd the other day, or The Dredd, that new one, which is great and extremely violent. Don't have kids watch it. But it's like all these like mega cities that no one know. Okay, there's DFW right there. Like it's all just one giant concrete jungle now at this point. So I'm jealous if you're going to Nova Scotia. Like I'm really jealous because I want some trees, some mountains and water.
Oh man, yeah, you can't beat the scenery there. Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah. Like I said, I can't wait to get back out there, but but I digress. All right, so yeah, we've covered quite a bit here, just in terms of really just financial planning, teaching financial literacy to children. Anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, if we're really going to start teaching our kids about finances and literacy, it's going to have to be up to the parents, the aunts, the uncles. It's going to be up to the family, because I don't see it happening in the schools. I think that, that's a much bigger conversation that I probably shouldn't have today. But, I think that we should definitely, as a family unit, kind of come together and start educating the younger generation. Something I always talk about with my clients is, if you're the generation that built the wealth, that you did it with tenacity, getting after it, sacrificing blood, sweat, tears, it's up to that second generation that's inheriting it to educate themselves on what is wealth, what are finances, how to educate it, and every generation from then, because not all of them lose, the money in the third generation or whatever, but they can be trapped. They can put themselves in bad situations. They can have bad investments. They need to be educated. And that's my big thing. I always hammer is just educate. And so there's great ways to do it. Find good resources that are out there. I kind of always say tongue in cheek, there's a great financial planning book called The Fundamentals of Financial Planning by Money Education. That was the first class I took in my CFP. And it was great. I think everyone should read that book, because it'll give you a solid foundation of what everything is, how it works, and then you can launch from there.
All right, good stuff. Now, one last thing that I kind of wanted to cover with you, just based on something you said earlier. We were talking about investing versus saving, and how just sitting on money basically causes it to lose value just naturally with inflation. What are kind of your recommendations on having a savings versus investing that money? Like what would you recommend for someone who's just starting out, especially since we're focusing on kids? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so when it comes to kids, it kind of depends. So let's use the same fundamentals that I use for everyone else. So depending on where you are in your life, if you're dual income, you're both working, both have kids, I always say 6 to 8 months of emergency savings for cash. So depending on the situation, how old the kids are, the vehicle, or they wreck it, they need to be able to cover, wrecks, food, just their monthly expenses, gas. I think if you can get a good baseline, I think that's a good way to start. But then at that point, it really depends on the individual. I think it really comes down to what's an amount that you can continually contribute that you don't think, oh, it's $1, but it's enough to where you know you're investing and you're putting your money in a wise situation. I know it's not a really good answer, but having enough to cover any emergency expenses, of course, and then also enough that you're investing, you're not just throwing away money in the market. You're not saying, oh, it's $1 here, it's $1 there, but actually enough to where it counts, to where you kind of go, all right, this is an investment. That's why it's staying there in that way, because the further you pull that pendulum back on investing, the further it goes forward.
No, that makes perfect sense, especially when you talk about having funds available for an emergency. Like if you've ever need an emergency fund, you definitely appreciate having it, not having to, try to find money somewhere, try to borrow money, overextend yourself to get yourself out of a jam. It's nice to have something, obviously you don't want to have something bad happen, but if something bad does happen, knowing that it's one less worry while you're dealing with that situation.
It's life. Hey, I had to pay $10,000 to fix a foundation, right? It's life. It just happens. It just happens. So if you have that cushion, then you're not getting in credit card debt. You're not having that bad snowball. So I love emergency savings. I think everyone should have them.
Yeah. Well, and that was something I learned from Dave Ramsey. Like I know his baby steps are, they're not overly complex or simple to follow, but at least it help you get off to a really good start. It's
a solid foundation. I mean, emergency savings, avoid credit card debt, protect your income if you're married and have kids, and then start saving for retirement like crazy. And then you can live a very happy life because you have those assets to make decisions on what you want to do and may not have to make compromises on your values.
Absolutely. All right. So James, for anybody who wants to get a hold of you, I'm going to pop your website up here right now, woodallwealthmanagement.com. But for anybody who wants to learn more about either your services or, just wants to have a conversation with you, what are the best ways to connect with you?
Yeah, so the website's a great spot to start. See what I do. I'm continually updating it. I have a little Calendly link. I'm not here to charge people money for a meeting or anything like that. I'm all about just making new friends. So certainly set up a meeting there, or honestly, just give me a call. It's 214-281-4496. I'll chat with you. Like, I'm not here to sell you anything, just make a new friend. And if it makes sense for us to work together, then absolutely. If not, I'll find someone else for you.
All right. Sounds good. Well, James, I appreciate the time. Appreciate the knowledge that you shared with us. And again, thank you for joining us. And for everyone who listened, thank you for letting us disrupt your everyday.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.